The European Union will only consider lifting restrictions on the aggressor state if it fully withdraws its troops from Ukrainian territory, French President Emmanuel Macron stated following a summit of European leaders in Paris.
In terms of short-term support for Ukraine, we also decided unanimously that this is not the time to lift whatever sanction on Russia, and there will not be a lifting of sanctions before peace is clearly established. And so, we plan to continue the economic pressure, especially on the shadow fleet and on some industrial capacities. We will remain mobilized on these points.
The Kremlin began pushing for sanctions relief immediately after its first meeting with the US delegation. Now Moscow has issued an ultimatum. Agreements on ensuring safe navigation in the Black Sea will only take effect if the West lifts sanctions on Russian Agricultural Bank and other institutions involved in international trade in food and fertilizers. Additionally, Russia demands the reconnection of its financial institutions to the global SWIFT banking system. Washington has stated that Russia's demands will be assessed, but much depends on the Kremlin's actions.
It will be determined by Russian leadership's next moves, whether the sanctions go up or down. And President Trump, I think, would not hesitate to raise the sanctions if it gives him a negotiating advantage.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that any relaxation of sanctions would only lead to further demands from Russia. On the contrary, he argues that increasing pressure on Moscow is the only way to achieve meaningful results.
We hope and believe that the U.S. will have the strength to force Vladimir Putin into an unconditional ceasefire. Sanctions against Russia must remain in place and be strengthened for as long as the Russian occupation continues.
The European Union has also rejected Russia's demands. According to a statement from the European Commission, lifting sanctions on the aggressor would grant Moscow yet another advantage. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz warned that making concessions to the Kremlin would be a serious mistake. Meanwhile, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed that Ukraine's partners are working to tighten restrictions on Russia to strengthen Kyiv's negotiation position.
Second, complete clarity that now is not the time for lifting of sanctions. Quite the contrary, what we discussed is how we can increase sanctions to support the US initiative to bring Russia to the table through further pressure from this group of countries.
According to EU Observer, citing European diplomats, the EU and its allies are working on a 17th package of sanctions, with proposals likely to be presented by early summer. However, sources caution that it is too early to set a firm timeline.
A fourth diplomat voiced caution on the timing, saying it's too speculative at this point. We have to see how the U.S.-Russia-Ukraine peace talks unfold. From EU Observer publication.
The previous 16th package of sanctions included 83 measures targeting 48 individuals and 35 entities responsible for actions undermining or threatening Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence. The sanctions included 74 more vessels of the Russian Shadow Fleet. In addition, the EU for the first time imposed a ban on transactions with credit and financial institutions established outside Russia that use the financial messaging system of the Bank of Russia. It also disconnected 13 Russian banks from the SWIFT payment system. Brussels expanded the list of under-sanctioned goods and suspended the broadcasting licenses of 8 Russian propaganda media outlets in the EU. The 16th package also included additional restrictions on Russia's ally Belarus. Reported by Serhiy Kulas, Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.
Russian lawmakers are seriously considering launching a printing press, a draft law granting the central bank the right to directly finance the Russian budget has been submitted by members of one of the parliamentary factions. According to the document, the Central Bank of Russia would be able to issue nearly interest-free loans to the government to cover the budget deficit, with an annual rate of just 0.15%. Additionally, lawmakers have proposed allowing the central bank to purchase government bonds, effectively financing the state treasury through monetary issuance.
The federal budget is in urgent need of funds, having spent 22 trillion rubles on the military and arms production over 3 years of war while accumulating a 9 trillion ruble deficit. To cover this, the Ministry of Finance has used up 2/3 of the National Wealth Fund's available reserves, amounting to $76 billion. Military spending for the current year is set at 13.2 trillion rubles, nearly 30% of the total budget, a record level since Soviet times, from the Moscow Times publication.
Western sanctions continue to batter Russian manufacturing as imported components become more expensive due to rising logistic costs. Enterprises are receiving goods at peak prices, with some shipments taking over 6 months to reach Russia. Meanwhile, suppliers demand full prepayment as a safeguard against risks. On top of this, financial settlement issues persist.
Almost all components for industrial equipment, commercial machinery and electronics are on sanction lists, making direct payments from Russia even to China difficult and to unfriendly countries impossible. VTB Bank Shanghai might accept a transfer for sanctioned goods, but not every supplier is willing to open an account there, and only a few Chinese banks accept transfers from VTB's subsidiary. Logistics are another hurdle. Major ocean freight companies will not guarantee shipments with sanctioned codes or not ensure deliveries if they involve a Russian trace, from the Moscow Times publication.
One sector where import substitution has completely failed is aviation. In the near future, Russia may be left without Ansat helicopters, used for civilian transport and medical evacuation. The reason is that the service life of their imported engines is nearing its end. Russian authorities approved a project in 2022 to replace critical imported components, but the newly developed engine requires a modified helicopter model that still has to undergo flight tests.
By 2029, 49 Ansat helicopters could be grounded, confirmed the Helicopter Industry Association. As of July 2024, the total Ansat-U and modified fleet stood at 140 units, with 88 in civilian use. The association noted that maintaining airworthiness for Ansat helicopters is complicated not only by engine shortages, but also by other technical components and systems, from the Moscow Times publication.
All of this is happening amid rising inflation. Instead of planned 4%, Russia's annual inflation rate accelerated to 9% in December 2024 and surpassed 10% by February 2025. The Kremlin is now looking for someone to blame, and the central bank is a prime target. The Accounts Chamber of the Federation Council has initiated an investigation into the central bank's policies since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, checking its monetary policy, expenditures and investments. The Kremlin is pressuring the central bank leadership over high interest rates, according to analysts at the Institute for the Study of War. Recently, the central bank announced that if economic conditions worsen, it is prepared to raise the key interest rate again. Meanwhile, Moscow is keen to conceal the real inflation rate and, most importantly, its root cause, the massive cost of continuing Russia's war against Ukraine. Reported by Katerina Bastun, Larissa Petruk, UATV News.